The county clerk read the notice out loud in the courthouse lobby, loud enough for the line of people behind to hear every word. Property seized for delinquent taxes. Sale scheduled for the 22nd of this month. Final notice. Then she looked up at the old man standing in front of her counter and added almost cheerfully, "You should have paid, sir. There's nothing we can do now." Harold Whitfield didn't answer. He folded the paper in half along the same crease the county had already folded it in, tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat, and turned toward the door. He was 71 years old. He had owned that land for 43 years, and the tax bill the county was claiming he hadn't paid was for a parcel his wife Eleanor had paid every January on the same day for 38 straight years before she died. He walked out into the cold November air and stood on the courthouse steps for a long moment. A young woman behind him was crying about a parking ticket. Harold didn't move. He looked down the street toward where his truck was parked, and then he looked east, toward the road that would take him home, toward the 86 acres his father had bought in 1958 with money saved from 22 years of working other men's fields. He didn't go home yet. He drove 3 blocks to the small law office on Maple Street, the one with the hand-painted sign, and he sat in his truck in the parking lot for 9 minutes before he went inside. Harold Whitfield was born in Greene County, Indiana in 1955, and he had not lived more than 40 miles from the 86 acres on County Road 400 East for any extended period of his life. He left once, for the Army, from 1973 to 1976, and he came back the same week his discharge was finalized because his father was already coughing the cough that would kill him 8 years later, and someone had to learn the land before that happened. His father, Earl Whitfield, had bought the original 64 acres in March of 1958 from a man named Clarence Bowden, who was selling because his sons had moved to Indianapolis and didn't want it. Earl paid $4,200 in cash, in an envelope, on the front porch of Bowden's house. There was a deed, there was a handshake, and there was something else that Earl tucked into the metal box he kept in the basement, something Earl mentioned exactly once to Harold in 1981, 3 months before he died. "There's an exemption on that land, son, from the original sale. Bowden put it in because his grandfather put it in. Don't ever lose the paper." Harold had nodded. He had been 26 years old and standing in a hospital room, and his father was on morphine, and there were 1,000 more important things to talk about. He had not asked which paper. He had not asked what kind of exemption. He had filed the conversation somewhere in the back of his mind under the heading of Things Old Men Say, and he had gone on with his life. Eleanor came into that life in 1982. She was a school teacher from the next county over, and she was the one who organized everything Earl had left behind. She made the metal box make sense. She labeled folders by year, in her own handwriting, in pencil that had faded a little but was still readable. She paid the property taxes every January on the 15th, because her father had taught her that bills should be paid on the same day every year, so you never had to wonder. For 38 years she paid that bill. Harold never once saw the receipt because he never once needed to. Eleanor died in May of 2020. She had been sick for 14 months. The last week, when she could still talk, she had told Harold 3 things. She had told him to keep eating. She had told him to call their daughter on Sundays. And she had told him very clearly that the metal box in the basement had everything he would ever need, and that if anything ever came up about the land, the answer was already in there. Harold had not opened the metal box since. He had paid the property taxes himself for the next 4 years, in January, on the 15th, the way she had. And then in February of this year, he had received a letter from a name he didn't recognize at the county tax office, saying that a previous payment had been rejected for insufficient documentation, and that a balance had accrued, and that the matter was being escalated. He had called. He had been put on hold. He had been transferred. He had been told someone would call him back. No one ever did. The escalation had been faster than he understood was possible. By August, he had received a notice of intent to lien. By October, a notice of seizure. By November, the final notice the county clerk had read aloud in the lobby with a line of people listening. Brennan Cole was 33 years old. He had been the assistant county tax administrator for 19 months. He had an MBA from a state school he mentioned often, and a quarterly performance review that rewarded him specifically for closing what the county called legacy delinquencies, meaning tax cases involving older property owners with paperwork older than the current digital system. The Whitfield case had landed on his desk in February. He had spent, by his own later admission in a deposition, approximately 14 minutes reviewing it before initiating the escalation sequence. 14 minutes to flag a 43-year ownership for seizure. He had checked the digital record, found a payment irregularity from 2021, and triggered the automated process. The irregularity was a check Eleanor had written from a bank account that had been closed 3 months after her death, an account Harold had not realized was still listed as a payment source. The check had cleared from a different account, his joint account, automatically. The county's old system had recorded the payment. The county's new system, transitioned in late 2022, had not. Brennan Cole had not looked at the property. He had not pulled the original deed. He had not flagged it for human review. He had run the protocol, generated the notices, and moved on to the next file. By his own department's metrics, this was efficient work. He had done it to 41 other property owners in Greene County in the same fiscal year. 38 of them had paid the disputed amount rather than fight. 2 had lost their land at auction. Harold Whitfield was the 42nd. The lawyer's name was Margaret Hadley. She was 64 years old, 3 years from retirement, and she had been practicing in Greene County since 1989. She listened to Harold for 11 minutes without interrupting. She looked at the final notice he had set on her desk. She looked at the dates. She looked at the dollar amount the county was claiming, which was $4,862 in alleged back taxes, penalties, and interest. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "this is going to be hard. The auction is in 9 days. Even if we file an emergency injunction, judges in this county don't stop tax sales for procedural disputes. They want clean evidence." Harold nodded slowly. "My wife told me the answer was in a metal box in the basement," he said. "I haven't opened it yet." Margaret looked at him for a long moment. "Then we should probably open it," she said. She drove out to the farm that afternoon. The basement was concrete and cold, and the light bulb hanging from the ceiling was the same one Earl had installed in 1962. The metal box sat on a wooden shelf next to a workbench Earl had built, and the workbench still had the wood vise Earl had used to repair tool handles, and the vise still worked. Harold turned the latch on the metal box. It opened with the quiet click of a thing that had been opened carefully many times and never forced. Eleanor's handwriting was on every folder. 1982, 1983, 1984, all the way forward. The folders for the property tax receipts were in the front, every one, every year. Margaret would look at those later. But behind the tax folders, near the back of the box, was a folder labeled in different handwriting. Earl's handwriting. Older. The label said simply, "Original Deed and Attachments, 1958. Margaret opened it on the workbench under the bare bulb. The deed was there. The bill of sale was there, and folded in thirds behind both was a single page on heavier paper than the rest, typed on a manual typewriter, signed in fountain pen ink that had aged but not faded. It was titled, in capital letters across the top, "Perpetual Agricultural Homestead Exemption, Greene County Ordinance 14-7, filed 1958. Margaret read it twice. The second time she sat down on the basement step. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "do you know what this is?" "My father said there was an exemption." "This is a county exemption that was passed in 1947 and amended in 1958, allowing for the perpetual tax exemption of any agricultural homestead of more than 50 acres held continuously by the same family for more than 20 consecutive years. It transfers with the land. It cannot be terminated by the county without the consent of the holder, and it was filed against this parcel by Clarence Bowden's grandfather in 1958, 2 weeks before he sold the land to your father." Harold did not say anything. "The county," Margaret said slowly, "has been collecting property taxes on this land for 43 years that they were never legally entitled to collect, including every payment your wife made, every January, for 38 years. The metal box was still open on the workbench. Harold looked at it. He looked at Eleanor's handwriting on the folders. He looked at his father's handwriting on the one folder behind hers. "What do we do?" he said. "We file tomorrow," Margaret said, "and we don't tell anyone what we have until we're standing in court." Brennan Cole heard about the emergency injunction filing on a Tuesday morning. He laughed about it in the break room. One of his colleagues later remembered the exact words. "Some old guy hired a lawyer, Margaret Hadley. She's basically retired. He thinks he can stop a tax sale with a 43-year-old document. We'll see him in court Thursday." 3 other employees were standing at the coffee machine when he said it. One of them was the office secretary, who had been working at the county for 26 years. She did not laugh. She returned to her desk and she wrote down the date and the time and the exact words in her steno notebook, because that was a habit she had developed in the 3rd year of her career and had never stopped. The hearing was held in the county courthouse on the 2nd floor, in a small wood-paneled courtroom with an American flag in the corner and a radiator that clanked in the cold. Judge Eleanor May Coffey, 68 years old, 29 years on the bench, presided. She had read the filings the night before. She always did. Brennan Cole arrived first, with 2 attorneys from the county's outside counsel, both younger than he was, both carrying matching black leather folders. They sat at the table on the left and arranged their papers and conferred in low voices. Harold arrived 4 minutes later, alone except for Margaret. He wore a clean white shirt that Eleanor had ironed in the spring of 2020 and that he had not worn since her funeral. His work boots were polished. He carried nothing in his hands. The county's lead attorney spoke for 18 minutes. He explained the payment irregularity from 2021. He explained the automated escalation protocol. He explained that the property had been properly noticed and the seizure was lawful and the auction should proceed. He used the phrase, "legacy delinquency," 4 times. Margaret stood up when he was done. She spoke for less than a minute. "Your Honor," she said, "the property in question has been held under a perpetual agricultural homestead exemption filed under Greene County Ordinance 14-7 since 1958. The exemption transfers with the land. The county has never been entitled to collect property taxes on this parcel. We are not contesting the 2021 payment. We are contesting 43 years of payments, and we would like the original 1958 filing entered into evidence." She walked forward and she set the single folded page on the judge's bench. The room was quiet. Judge Coffey unfolded the page. She read it. She read it again. She turned it over. She looked at the date stamp on the back, which was the original Greene County Clerk's stamp from October of 1958, faded but readable. She looked up at the county attorney. "Counsel," she said, "are you familiar with Ordinance 14-7? The attorney hesitated. "I am not, Your Honor. It has been on the books in this county since 1947. It was amended once, in 1958. It has never been repealed. Were you aware of any active filings under this ordinance when you initiated the seizure proceedings against Mr. Whitfield?" He said nothing. "Mr. Cole," she looked past the attorneys directly at Brennan, "you signed the seizure authorization in October. Did you at any point pull the original deed for this property from the county records?" Brennan Cole opened his mouth, then he closed it. "I'll take that as a no," she said. She set the document down. "The seizure is vacated. The auction is canceled. The lien is dissolved. All taxes collected on this parcel from the date of the original exemption filing are to be refunded with interest, calculated at the statutory rate. I will issue a written order this afternoon. We will reconvene in 30 days to review the refund schedule and to determine whether further sanctions against the county are warranted." She paused. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm sorry it took this long for someone to read the file." Harold nodded once. The refund, when it was finally calculated, came to $286,400 in returned taxes, plus statutory interest of $58,200, for a total of $344,600. The county paid it in 3 installments over 4 months. Brennan Cole was reassigned to a clerical position in the records office and resigned 11 weeks later. The 41 other cases he had escalated were reopened by the county auditor under court order. 12 of them were found to have similar exemptions. 7 of those properties were restored. 4 had already been sold at auction, and the new owners had to be bought out by the county at significant cost. Harold Whitfield drove home from the courthouse the day of the ruling and did not stop anywhere along the way. He pulled the truck up to the house and he sat in it for a few minutes with the engine off. Then he got out and he walked, not toward the house, but down the long path that ran along the east fence line, the path Eleanor had walked every evening for 38 years. He walked all the way to the back of the property, past the second creek, to the stand of oak trees Earl had planted in 1961. Eleanor was buried under the oldest of them, in a small fenced plot, with a flat stone the local mason had cut from limestone quarried 4 miles to the south. Harold stood there for a long time. The wind moved in the oak branches above him. The sun was getting low. He took the folded page out of his coat pocket. The Exemption. The one his father had told him about and he had almost forgotten. He held it in his hand for a moment. "You knew," he said quietly. "You always knew where everything was." He folded the page once more, exactly the way Earl had folded it in 1958, and he put it back in his coat. He stood there until the light started going gold on the field. Then he turned, and he walked back the way he had come. That night in the basement, he opened the metal box one more time. He returned the folded page to the folder marked Original Deed and Attachments, 1958, in his father's handwriting. He closed the folder. He closed the box. He turned the latch. He went upstairs and he made dinner, and he ate it standing at the kitchen counter, looking out the window toward the fence Earl had built in 1959 and that Harold had repaired post by post every spring for 40 years. There are old papers in old basements all across this country, documents folded by hands that are gone now, filed by people who knew exactly what they were protecting and exactly who they were protecting it for. The county forgot. The new system forgot. But Earl Whitfield did not forget, and Eleanor Whitfield did not forget, and the page in the metal box waited quietly in the dark until it was needed. That is what record-keeping is. That is what love looks like, decades after the person who loved you is gone. Harold wasn't the only one. There were 41 other letters that went out that year from Greene County, and 41 other people sat at kitchen tables trying to figure out how to fight back. Some of them had metal boxes. Some of them didn't. The next story is about one of the ones who didn't, and what she found instead, in a place no one thought to look. Subscribe so you don't miss it. We'll see you there.